Good morning. My name is Sue Ann Lang, and I will be your worship coordinator this morning on this very typical hot, muggy summer morning. So thank you for being here, and if you're a gardener, know your garden is growing. Because boy, with this heat and humidity and what, an inch and a half of rain earlier in the week, everybody, all the plants ought to be happy. So anyway, welcome today. We have a very special speaker this morning because it's one of ours. It's one of our members who is willing to share her journey with us. Because many of us are not lifelong Unitarians. Many of us have come here from somewhere else, or maybe we were a nun. No church attendance or whatever it is. Anyway, they're calling them nuns. But so we each are here for different reasons, and Joy is willing to share hers with us, so we're very grateful for that. Thank you to Joseph for playing this morning. Oh, that last one was a winner. So, and Leah for doing our child care. She's back there, and we always have people available to do child care, and then we start our regular program in the fall. So if you know people who are asking, that's the way it is. Let's see, other things. If you've not been into the Peace Garden recently, I would encourage you to go. The flowers are blooming. The waterfall is going. The arbor is up and accessible to people of all abilities, whether you are able or not. We have a slope now, and so and benches, and so it's quite wonderful out there now. Thanks to Ann, it looks glorious. Ann Essie is kind of our gardener for the summer, and before she goes back to Florida in the winter, and probably teaching in Chicago this fall. Anyway, I'm not sure what her plans are. They kind of go like this, other than she goes to Florida in the winter time to be with her little granddaughter and her daughter. So anyway, thank you, Ann Essie, and if you see her, you can tell her too. I have no announcements particularly other than what's in the order of service. I would encourage you to look at those. If you have questions, ask someone with a name tag on, and if they don't know the answer, they'll find someone who does, and they'll find someone. Thank you for Becky for being our videographer, for Terry for doing the sound. Janet, did you get coffee going this morning? It's the magicness of coffee. Somebody had it ready to go. So there will be coffee after the service at our lower level. We do have an elevator. It's not officially an elevator. It's called a lift. For accessibility, we do have a bathroom on the left, clear at the back of the sanctuary. I think those are housekeeping items. We do have an exit here also to go downstairs, so there are two. I like these stairs better. They're not as narrow and steep. That's my preference. We don't have any babies, so we have rocking chairs back there. We had a baby, so I would transition from the housekeeping into just a general statement of wherever you are on your journey, a spiritual journey. You are welcomed here, whomever you love, whomever loves you. Wherever you find yourself, whether it's knowing answers or having questions, you are very welcomed here.
Okay, thank you, Sue Ann, and I am Joy. I chose these words because they really sum up for me the aspect that I enjoy most about being a UU. Flame of fire, spark of the universe that warmed our ancestral hearth, agent of life and death, symbol of truth and freedom, we strive to understand ourselves and our earthly home. By Leslie Pohl Koslau.
Joy has a story for us. We have two young ones and one really young one.
Yes, indeed. So I chose this story from a wonderful book here by Marilyn McFarland called Sacred Myths. And one thing I love about our religious tradition is we take texts and stories and myths from all the world's great sacred texts and all of the world's wonderful stories where we can find meaning. And this story is a creation story called Gaia. Okay, so this is called Gaia Creates Herself. And of course, in this story, Gaia is the earth. Out of the great nothing, there exploded a thunderous sound, the music of all the sounds there ever will or were. A sound so loud it pulsated for eons, and with a mighty sound came billions of chunks of fire and light and rock and dust, striking or streaking across the wide emptiness. One of the chunks was Gaia. She spun out and away, farther and farther, rolling and spinning herself into a ball. She tilted, she turned, she danced to the music and the rhythm of the sound. All around her and in the furthest reaches of distance, fireballs glowed. The closest fireball bathed one side of her in light, while the other side rested in the cool, shadowy dark. And as she spun, the dark side turned to light, and the light to dark. And so she spun, light and dark, light and dark. She stretched, and still spinning, she spewed fire and rock, and from her body came mountains, valleys, hills, ridges, plains, chasms. She breathed, and clouds formed, and rain fell, and deep oceans filled her sides, splashing against the shores. Rivers flowed through her valleys. Gaia laughed, and life came forth. Fishes swam, green shoots sprouted. Creatures walked over the contours of her body. Gaia was exalted. She loved what she had done. She couldn't stop. She laughed again, creating more and more life, just to feel it growing, flowing, swimming, crawling, breathing. Ferns, moss, pterodactyls, dandelions, daisies, hemlock trees, giraffes, cocker spaniels, carnations, snakes, tarantulas, tigers, butterflies, redwood trees, and humans. Gaia, the Great Mother, laughed men and women into being, and they stood and walked in wonder on the soft green grass. They saw snowy mountains, a high blue sky, apple trees. They smelled pine needles and sun-warmed blackberries, and heard the hiss of the surf and the croak of the raven, touched rough stone and soft skin. Gaia provided clear water and abundant food for her creatures. In dreams and visions, she came to the humans and taught them where to find plants they could eat, and roots and ripe fruits and berries. And from her they learned to walk quietly in the forest and jungle, and also to speak. They spoke to the spirits of the animals that they hunted for food and fur. In her wisdom, Gaia gave sorrow, for without it, humans cannot appreciate happiness. She gave joy, anger, curiosity, fear, grief, hope, and love. She was the provider of everything, of earthquakes, hurricanes, and floods, as well as sunny days and gentle nights. She who created life and sustained it took it back into her body after death. The humans adored Gaia, the Great Mother, and they revered her power. In gratitude for her gifts, they placed offerings for her in clefts and rocks and earth. And sometimes they left honey and cakes, sometimes grain or fruits. Always they left their grateful thanks. Gaia smiled and kept on spinning, and she still spins.
Let's sing our children out to Leah.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
569, excuse me, 569. I can't read this one. I will start by reading the bold, if you will follow with the italicized. Stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it.
There is nothing in all the world so important as to be loyal to this faith, which places for us lofty ideas.
Which has comforted us in sorrow, strengthened us in noble duty, and made the world beautiful.
Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that we are worthy to trust us with this great message.
That you are strong enough to work for a great true principle without counting the cost.
Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyments in their contemplation, always trusting in one God, which ever is and loves.
Thank you. Our speaker is Joy Hembel. She is a member of our congregation, and we are delighted to have her share her journey with us today.
Thank you, Sue Ann. Thank you so much, and thank all of you for inviting me to speak. This is only the second time in my life that I have ever spoken at length before any congregation. The first time, I was a senior in high school, and as part of the faith tradition which I grew up in, it was required of all seniors to get before the congregation on some of the Sunday mornings that they would pick for us in the spring, and have us tell them what we believed. So after having gone through confirmation and Sunday school and all that, they knew what they wanted to hear. So I'm honored to be here with you today. You may not like what I say, but that's okay, because we have a free pulpit and a free pew, and we can choose to disagree. So I will share with you, just for a few minutes, my reflections on my religious journey. You've probably all heard of the idea that we tend to be greatly influenced primarily by the people that surround us, the people we meet, and the words we hear and see. And I hope that some of the authors that I mentioned today you will find worth exploring on your own, if you haven't already, because they might also inspire you, as they have inspired me. As I think about how and why I became and stay an active, supporting UU member of this denomination, my journey seems to fall into two parts. Before I was a UU and after I became a UU. And I think before was a pretty good setup for me becoming one. I did not become a UU until my mid-40s. And I inherited my parents' religion, my parents' Protestant Christianity, just because I was a member of their family. And I just cannot explain why I did not become a UU sooner. But a lot has to do with chance. I've always enjoyed asking questions and seeking answers. And I had actually told Becky if she had time, but she didn't. She could have just put a big question mark up there instead of my picture. Because if you can imagine a big question mark superimposed over my feet there, I love hearing questions, asking questions, and trying to think about answers to those questions. And I will tell you, my answers change frequently. So anyway, I just didn't realize until I first started attending the UU Church in the early 90s how much this was a good fit for me. So my background. When I was a little girl, I loved singing in the car with my mother. My father was tone deaf, and my mother loved to sing. And we loved to harmonize. So I remember my first memory is probably driving in the car at night, making lengthy trips between relatives, because we had to go visit all the grandparents. They all lived about an hour away. Singing the song "Tell Me Why." I don't know if any of you know that song, but it says, "Tell me why the stars do shine. Tell me why the ivy twines. Tell me why the skies are blue. And I will tell you just why I love you." I love that song. I always got to sing the tenor part. My mother did the lead. So we just felt great. I felt great joy and a sense of security in this singing of the song. And although I found the words somewhat perplexing, because in fact the second verse goes, "Because God made the stars to shine, because God made the ivy twine, because God made the sky so blue, because God made you, that's why I love you." I didn't quite understand that, but I delighted in the harmony and didn't really worry too much about what God meant or the meaning of that word. And I've always been attracted to unexplainable mysteries and miracles, so I just let it go with that. Growing up in Wisconsin, I attended a variety of Protestant Sunday schools until about age 7, when my parents became Congregationalists. I was confirmed at age 13 with about 25 other young people. It was a huge church. It was a large suburban Milwaukee church with lots of services and 2, sometimes 3 ministers, lots of classes and social offerings. My father had been a very traditional, conservative Christian, and my mother strongly disliked any religious creeds. She did not want anybody telling her what to believe. And so she certainly didn't believe that God was a father on a throne. And although her father's family had been very active in the Norwegian Lutheran Church in Wisconsin, my mother just wasn't going for any religion that had a very strict creed. So Congregationalism was a compromise for them. Traditional enough for my theologically conservative father, but liberal enough for my doubting mother. My mother went to church to sing the hymns, which she loved. She would often take me to hymn sings at whatever church would have them. She'd sometimes go all over the state just to go to a good hymn sing, and she didn't care about the denomination. We enjoyed singing hymns together, and the songs that I chose today include some of those hymns that are my favorites. Even though you may think the language is archaic, I will go into that in detail in a bit. I love those songs. What now strikes me as odd is that while my mother disliked reciting any creed with which she did not literally agree, she had no qualms about singing words to songs with which I'm sure she did not literally agree. I guess she understood that was poetry, that was metaphor, and she just liked the sound of her own voice. It was as if she understood that those songs were poetry and metaphors, but she didn't think that the words of a religious creed were metaphor, so she didn't go there. I've decided that my father joined that church to hear the good word, and my mother joined to hear and sing the good music. So this Congregational church did have a very liberal interpretation of the Word of God. And for example, when I asked in my confirmation class about our minister's definition of God, he explained God was the creator of our world, the primal mover, the Big Bang, if I chose to think of it that way. I said, okay. Now, if my father had heard this, I think he might have been shocked, but I didn't discuss it with my father. Theologically, our minister also had a liberal interpretation of the Bible. He carefully explained in our confirmation classes how the book of Genesis had no conflict whatsoever with Darwin's theories. It's just right there in the same order. This church was tolerant, very open to other religions. In fact, I first learned about Unitarianism as a member of the youth group at that church. I was told that Unitarianism had evolved out of the early New England Congregational churches. And later on, we had a UU minister, Sam Shaw, at our first Unitarian Church of St. Louis, who had just come to be our interim minister, but had just finished ministering as an assistant minister at my congregational church in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. And, he said, theologically, he found very little difference between that congregational church and our UU church. Just the fact that they used this creed, which talked about Jesus being the Son of God. And he told me that being a UU minister in my congregational church, and I think he was there for about 5 years, was just fine with him. He said something to the effect about, oh, what the hell, it's all metaphor anyway. I was sort of shocked, but this is what he said, and reflecting on his comment that all religion is metaphor helped me quite a bit on my journey to understand my own religious beliefs. In fact, I was recently reminded of Minister Shaw's statement when reading Neil Gaiman's American Gods. I don't know how many of you have read that, but in that novel, at the beginning of chapter 18, Gaiman writes, quote, "Religions are, by definition, metaphors, after all. Religions are places to stand and look and act, vantage points from which to view the world." That sort of blew me away too. Earlier in that novel, Gaiman describes a priestess talking as follows, quote, "Gods are great," said Atsula slowly, as if she were imparting a great secret. "But the heart is greater, for it is from our hearts they come, and to our hearts they shall return." I interpret these words to mean that the religions we humans ascribe to are our own worldviews. And I believe that we create religions to help us make sense of our world. And I believe, at least in most of the churches I have attended, religions do help us make a better world, if the only thing they do is help us behave in better ways. As a Congregationalist in Sunday school, I remember learning the Hebrew and Christian Bible stories, the 10 Commandments, and the Golden Rule. And during junior and senior high school, I was very active in choirs. I sang religious solos at Sunday services, funerals, weddings. I was in the youth group, traveling to youth conferences, directing plays. I was an assistant Sunday school teacher. And in fact, I was vice president of our youth group, which means I was in charge of programming the weekly potluck dinner meetings. This was always a challenge, probably not unlike being chair of the worship committee here. Always saying, who can we get to speak? I enjoyed being a member of that church. And in retrospect, my positive experiences while being a member of that church probably led me to becoming an active member in my 3 UU churches. And I hold a debt of gratitude to that congregation. When I went on to college, I was away from home. I no longer regularly attended church. I did, however, have a quote in my dorm room that I remember our senior minister saying. You probably have heard this quote quite a bit, and I sort of try to follow this rule. Most people use other people and love money. Instead, we should love people and use money. That's the one thing out of all those years of him preaching that I remember him saying, and that really stuck with me. And that was sort of my ethical code for my life at that point. It was a reminder to me of the main ideal that I had learned from my church. I continue to try to follow this ideal value of loving people above all, and it kept me grounded. I was part of a small group of Christian students who met once a week and discussed religion. Occasionally I went to local Protestant churches, usually on dates. That's probably the reason we had that small group anyway, to find dates. I tried to live by Christian ideals, but I was not an active member of any church. After my junior year in France, where I never went to church except to marvel at the architecture, I dated a Catholic. And I transferred to a Jesuit school, Marquette University in Milwaukee. And here I joyfully attended Mass. Everybody was doing it. They didn't ask. I found the nuns and the priests to be absolutely wonderful. They were great counselors, great philosophers, and wonderful teachers. They didn't care if I was Catholic or not, and they provided a loving and intellectually stimulating environment that made me feel welcome. I chose to do my master's thesis under the tutelage of a Belgian priest, Father Barjon, and I did it on Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's famous book, The Little Prince, which some of you know it's been translated into English. And one of the most famous quotes from Saint-Exupéry is, in fact, quote, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye," unquote. I did the explication de texte of Saint-Exupéry's symbolism in The Little Prince, and I'm right back again to the Neil Gaiman quote about the heart. It is in the heart that one can see rightly. At Marquette, I had to take 15 hours of philosophy, plus theology courses for non-Catholics. And I loved it. I had never heard of philosophy before. I tested it out of everything at my small liberal arts school, and here I got to study the good stuff. I was introduced to Plato, Socrates, theologians such as Paul Tillich. This experience opened my eyes. This was the first time I was exposed to the history of Western philosophy and religion. I mean, my church had talked about different denominations, but they didn't go into the philosophy. And I heard about the concept that, quote, "a religion reflects the society that creates it," unquote. I cannot imagine how I could have later studied Western European literature in any depth without having had the philosophical background that my Marquette education gave me. It was also at Marquette where I first heard the Up With People singers on a concert tour where they sang "Let There Be Peace on Earth" and "Let It Begin With Me," a song that I absolutely love, and I know we've sung it here many times. All in all, the Jesuits gave me a joyful and eye-opening experience on my journey. Although I did not convert to Catholicism, I was too much like my mother, I respect and admire those educators to this day, and I remain in their debt. By the time I went on to another graduate school, this time a public state school, I no longer felt the need for any organized religion in my life. It was a somewhat stressful time for me, and I probably could have benefited from practicing a religion, but I just felt I didn't have one. In my late 20s and early 30s, I spent my time on my additional education, working 3 part-time jobs to pay for my education, and finding a life partner. All of those things are time-consuming, as you know. So, end of the first part there. Now we're into part 2, after becoming and staying a UU. By the time I was a parent, after marrying and establishing my career, my religious journey took a turn when I joined the UU denomination in my mid-40s. When our 3 children were between 3 and 7, around 1994, my husband and I both decided that we wanted them to have a religious education, the kind that we had had in our Protestant church Sunday schools. We wanted them to understand the history of religions and be familiar with the important roles religions have played in our world. How could you be educated if you didn't really know that background, especially about all of the literature and all of the texts that we have around us? So we started church shopping and ended up attending and joining the First Unitarian Church of Cleveland. We chose it because it had a liberal theology, it had the largest children's religious education program of all the UU churches in Cleveland, and at that time, it went on total hiatus during the summer. We thought, yay, we don't have to go to church in the summer. And that was sort of the tradition back then. I mean, we did have some lay-led services, sort of like I'm doing today, but our minister had the entire summer off, which was sort of the tradition in the churches at that time. We liked the fact that we did not need to take the kids to Sunday school in the summer, because there was no Sunday school. And we liked the very scaled-back schedule of services. Lots of people were on vacation, and that's probably, I know it originated in New England because it was too hot to go to church before air conditioning in the summer. Most of the members of that church did not attend during the summer months. My husband and I agreed with our reasonable UU 7 principles, which of course are printed on the back of our order of service. We attended services most every Sunday when it wasn't the summer, or when we were not teaching Sunday school. And we made many good friends and participated in many fundraisings, social events, and the choir. We loved it, not only because of the religious education for our kids, but also for the intellectual stimulation of the sermons. And I will tell you, we had a wonderful minister, Bruce Marshall, who's still writing books, lives in the DC area, wonderful writer, wonderful speaker, very stimulating sermons. We loved it for the rich conversation and the fellowship with others who were respectfully open to a variety of ideas and theologies. I remember one time we had a reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer come and interview 4 of our members because they wanted to know why a Jewish person, a Catholic person, an atheist, and someone who considered themselves Lutheran were all attending our church. Our church was that open. I mean, our church welcomed everybody, as Sue Ann has said, whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey. And it was exciting. It was so exciting. Some people went to 4 churches. They would rotate. We had this one Cleveland news broadcaster who belonged and contributed to 4 different churches. It would just rotate. And one of them was our UU church. It was a great church. It still is. We loved the music. We often had musicians come in from the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra because the choir director was married to one of the men in the orchestra, and the music was outstanding. I felt at home because of the church's New England architecture, which was just like my first congregational church in Wauwatosa, had all that white columns, and it was just, I felt really at home with the people in the church. However, around 1999, we moved to St. Louis. And so we had to leave that church, and we joined our second UU church, the First Unitarian Church of St. Louis. And that was a very different church. No England new architecture there. It was all really old-fashioned. It was like someone going into a dreary old Methodist church that was built around 1900 with a lot of Art Nouveau, dark paintings. And it had a minister who had gradually become more Christian during the 25 years that he had been there. But we felt a connection. They had the same 7 principles. I sort of ignored the darkness in the church. Our minister had first interned at our congregational church in Cleveland 25 years before. So there was that connection. We adjusted to the minister. Now, in our previous church, you have to understand, at that time, Bruce Marshall didn't use the word God. Reverend Bruce Marshall just didn't say God. Earl Holt, who was gradually becoming more and more Christian, although he started out very liberal, he used the word God all the time. And he was quoting from the poet T.S. Eliot. Now, T.S. Eliot, who grew up in that church in St. Louis, later converted to Catholicism. So we had this theme of T.S. Eliot running through that church, which, I guess is okay. His grandfather had founded the church. It was the first church on the other side of the Mississippi. But he later converted to Catholicism. So, and, we just had a lot of that God word coming in. His grandfather, like I said, had been very active in the community, founded Washington University, where my husband was teaching at the time, as well as our church. And we adjusted. We made many, many friends we still hold dear today. Our kids were still young. They attended Sunday school, youth conferences. We taught Sunday school. We attended adult education classes and participated in many, many activities. I was on the board, and I was chair of my favorite thing ever, the Circle Supper Committee, which meant, accordingly, I got to organize where we'd have numerous circle suppers throughout the city with 8 to 10 people. It was just a potluck where we would have fun and talk. I loved it. I was on the Partner Unitarian Church Committee. We're a partner church in Romania, and made many, many good friends that way. I visit there regularly. When I'm in St. Louis, I was in there back there in May and had a lot of fun, and it's a great community. Very different church, but we still loved it. Then we moved here. By the time I moved to Sioux Falls in 2010, I'd retired from teaching full-time. Our kids were all over 18, and I was most grateful to find this community my third UU congregation. Again, a very different UU church, but so small that I've been able to be even more active. And over the years, I've served here as board president and on the finance committee, the fundraising committee, blah, 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 lots of stuff. But most recently, I've become chair of the worship committee. And as I said earlier, I just can't say enough for the members of that team. Now, I was not attending church so that our kids could get a religious education. That was not my motivating factor. Now I attended church because it gave me what I needed. And that's primarily these Sunday morning services, which inspire me to go forward and try to do good for the rest of the week, to be on my best behavior based on my principles. The intellectual stimulation of conversations with individuals who are not afraid to ask questions and respectfully discuss varying ideas, philosophies, or theologies, and the fellowship of positive individuals who lead by example. This is what I like. I like the idea of being with others who aspire to do, quote, good, unquote, who like me have this religious practice of regularly meeting together to reaffirm our beliefs so that we can be better. And then hopefully maybe the world can also be a better place. Now, why do I stay at UU? Many people join a church or denomination and leave after a few years. And it is very easy for us to leave our churches. No social stigma, usually no problem. But I stay because I truly believe that my religious practice is good for my health. As the psychologist Jung has said, man cannot stand a meaningless life. And a religious practice, and for me this practice is attending our UU Sunday church services regularly and trying to live my values daily. A religious practice helps give meaning to my life because it reminds me of what I value and how I have chosen to act because of my values. It gives me purpose. It reminds me to try to be on my best behavior so I can be a positive force, not a negative one, in this world. And believe me, I need regular reminding. As we heard in the Gaia story, she doesn't only give us laughter and joy, she gives us anger, and she gives us many things that are negative. So I need regular reminding not to let those negative vibes take over my life. Recently, I was reading William James, who, by the way, gave many lectures to the Society of Unitarian Ministers while he was living in New England around the turn of the century. James says that religion exists because we humans realize that, quote, something is wrong, but it can be set right, unquote. Again, when I read that, that was an aha moment for me because why do we have religions? Because we somehow inherently know that something is wrong, but it can be set right. And I think we can all agree that something is wrong in our world. Our world is not as it should be. Even sometimes I know I'm speaking for myself here, I am not always as I should be. James also says, quote, my experience is what I agree to attend to, unquote. I know that he's been considered sometimes the father of many 10-step programs and pragmatism and you name it, he's been considered the father of that. This idea that my experience is what I agree to attend to, when I read that, I just had a revelation. It reminded me that I have the power to will myself to focus on what I choose, no matter what my inner or outer distractions. And I will say William James suffered all his life from bouts of depression. And I'm not trying to say that mental illness is easy, but he struggled and struggled, and sometimes coming out of his struggle, he would have these revelations. And when he discovered that my experience is what I agree to attend to, he realized that we do control so much of our own thinking, and that we can sometimes, especially with the help of others, will ourselves to change our thoughts. For me, my UU religious practice is choosing to regularly give my attention to our Sunday services, which help me focus on setting myself right. This focus helps me believe that I can set right what is wrong within myself, and therefore I can choose to agree to those ideal values, such as what Reverend Ted talked about last week, liberty and justice for all, or the values of kindness, gratitude, forgiveness, patience, generosity, and love, all those positive values that I was taught in my congregational church to feel. I can agree to attend to such positive values so that I can go forth into the world and act accordingly. I don't succeed all the time, of course not. That's why I need to keep practicing. And I need to regularly remind myself that my experience and my actions are my choice. So being a member of this congregation helps me ask the hard questions and make the, quote, right, unquote, choices for my attention. Let me see where I am doing here on the time, Sue Ann. Oh, I better close. Okay, So I originally became a UU member for my children. I stayed a UU because I discovered the many benefits of attending and belonging to the UU church for me. And I just feel that I've gained so much from this church and this denomination. They've helped me to routinely focus on and define values that I find worthwhile. And this church helps keep me on track. It reminds me to be positive, and it reminds me of what is important in life. It has helped me and inspired me to live a more positive and healthy life. If you care to stay for the circle discussion afterwards, that will be at about, 11:20? And if you care to discuss any of the hymns or any of the readings that I chose this morning, I've got a lot more detailed information on that. And that's the one thing I really appreciate about these UU services. They expose us to texts and ideas and maybe some very, very old things that we haven't considered in a while, but we can interpret them with new eyes and learn new truths. So I thank you for listening and hope to see you at circle discussion.
We extinguish our chalice. I would invite you to join in these words. Chalice is extinguished, the light goes out into the world. Join us for coffee, please.